Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy, but America's agricultural landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertisement campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in. From the producers who make your food, to the store where you buy the final product, and everything in between. This is Real Ag. Now, here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
Elk and Buffalo have proven themselves to be a low-fat, high-protein meat that's sought after worldwide. But what's the process for raising and taking care of these animals? We'll find out that and a lot more as we talk to both an elk and buffalo rancher on this Elk and Buffalo episode of Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
What is the difference between a bison and a buffalo?
Same thing. One's the scientific name, the other one's kind of a nickname. They are bison. Buffalo is actually an African or Asian animal, but it's a nickname from the early days.
Are they an endangered species?
No. During the bottleneck, late 1800s, we got down to, less than 1,000. It depends on who you ask. Of course, it depends on who you ask how many we had to begin with. But we're numbering probably fairly close to 400,000 now between the U.S. and Canada.
How big is a full-grown buffalo?
Some of the older bulls can get up to 2,600 to 2,900 pounds. Those are some really big ones. Cows typically are 1,000 to 1,200, and there are some 1,500 pound cows, but not too many.
How far will a buffalo travel?
Well, that's kind of up for debate. I would imagine they could travel a long ways if they wanted to. They're a rotating grazer, and so they tend to not move great distances like in a migration. But I would say 20 to 50 miles is what they could move if they wanted to. They could probably move more than that, but there would need to be a reason. I would say typically you'd probably cover a 5 to 10 mile area and just do their normal rotational grazing that they do.
Does it take special equipment or fencing to raise buffalo?
No. 5-strand barbed wire does the trick. They work really well with electricity if you have electric fence. A lot of guys use high tensile electric, especially in large acreage areas. We like to use a high tensile woven wire fence. It's about 4 foot tall, and we put it 6 inches off the ground and then put 1 or 2 barbed wires on top, and so we'll end up with a fence about in this area, and they do really, really well with that. Of course, that's in low pressure areas, and corral system needs to be a little stouter and done a little differently.
What are the regular therapies or vaccinations for buffalo?
Well, parasites are always a challenge, and I think they're very much a challenge for these guys, because back in the day they never really had to get used to too much of a parasite load, because they just kept roaming. They kept walking away from what they left behind, and now we've put up a fence, and so we've kind of changed that game. There's a perimeter everywhere, no matter where you're at. Even if you're in Yellowstone, there's a perimeter, a boundary. But that is a challenge. As far as other vaccinations go, we kind of tell folks getting into it, find out what is prevalent in your area and maybe consider doing that. We have cultured out very little known cattle diseases in buffalo. They're bison. They're very closely related, but there are some differences, and so most of it's not necessary. Mycoplasma has been something that's on the horizon. Actually, it's in the past too, but it's been kind of plaguing us of late, and so that's something that we're trying to work through, trying to figure out exactly what is the protocol that will do the most good.
What is your feed program for finishing animals?
There's room for everybody. There are some folks that do a grass-fed only, and there are some that do a grain finished, and there are others like me that are kind of in the middle. We do a pelleted ration that we offer the animals, and they're either with free choice hay or they're out on pasture with that same setting. And so they're able to get the nutritional needs that they need to develop to their potential, and they do a lot better job of picking out what it is they need than we do. We try our best to outsmart ourselves, and we usually get that done about at every turn.
When is breeding season?
Yeah, these are wild animals. They do have a rut and a calving season, and so typically, late summer, early fall, July is a pretty intense month for the breeding season. The rut starts to happen in June, and by July, by the end of August, they're pretty much done with breeding season, and then for the most part the calving season will be April, May. The rut is simply the bulls sparring and establishing dominance to figure out who's going to be doing the breeding this year, and that can, while they're typically not battles to the death, sometimes that can happen. Injuries can happen, and it can be a pretty rough time.
Will the mother separate from the herd to have the calf, or will the herd take in the calf?
A little of both. The mom will oftentimes go off by herself to have that calf, or maybe there's 2 or 3 that will kind of separate themselves from the herd and have the calf. It kind of depends on how much human interaction there is on a daily basis. Out here, I suspect they would come together pretty quickly. At home, in a different pasture setting that's close to home, if we're around a lot, the moms will, for the first 3 or 4 days, as soon as we show up, will take their calves and run away. They'll teach their calves that this is not where you want to be, and those calves imprint off a mom really quick. After about 3 or 4 days, it's interesting to watch, because mom will come in. If you're going to feed something, mom will come in to get the feed. The calf will be very, very cautious at that point. It will be watching us all the time to see what we're up to, what we're going to do. So she's done her job.
What is a natural predator of the buffalo?
Well, wolves would be a natural predator, and I suspect grizzlies would too, but they're kind of a little bit more of a scavenging kind of animal, and these guys are a pretty formidable foe, if you will. But wolf packs are pretty tough on buffalo, and I suppose you could get a mountain lion or something like that could do some damage too, but it would probably have to be a fairly weak, crippled, injured, sick, whatever animal. We've had some good friend of mine answered a questionnaire on what kind of predator, protection and what do you do for injuries following a predator attack, and he said he usually has the vet on standby to take care of the coyotes when they come to try to take that calf away from mom, because they're not gonna get the job done. Cows will gather up, they'll kind of herd up. You've probably seen muskox, how they do that. These do a little bit the same thing. They're not near as regimented in how they form that circle, but they will all take their turns protecting the whole herd.
What is the main purpose of raising buffalo?
The meat is very it's very good. It's very much in demand. The cardiologists are touting its qualities. The dietitians the same way. Health conscious people, athletes. That all those folks are seeking this out, and there's a whole host of people that are starting to realize how good this meat really is. And folks are paying attention to who's raising it and what they're doing and how they're doing it, what they're giving it and what they're not giving it. And that's become a pretty big thing.
Do you utilize every part of the buffalo like the way the Indians did?
Pretty much, and that kind of comes down to cultural differences. There are some ethnic groups that will utilize pieces and parts that maybe the natives didn't necessarily utilize. I've seen that myself. But the fiber is being spun into wool for different garments, and it's a non-allergenic, or we believe it's a non-allergenic material that's machine washable and dryable, and it lasts a really long time, so that's being utilized. Of course, the leather is being utilized. All the edible parts are, and the dog food industry is really coming on strong now, looking for anything and everything they can get their hands on. So the inedible parts that are typically made into dog food are being sought after for that reason as well.
Is raising buffalo as profitable as raising cattle?
Some of the infrastructure costs might be just a little higher from the startup as far as the working facility goes, and maybe you add a wire or two to the height of your pasture fence. Aside from that, not so much. We like to graze these things year-round. They do really well with that. We don't move them home for the winter. We don't pin them up for the winter. We leave them out where they're at, and so the stocking rate is done accordingly. It's on a year-round basis instead of a grass season, and they do so well in managing that we don't need a lot of supplemental feed then in the wintertime. So really it's less. It's going to cost less probably than typical other domestic type of livestock. They can do with less in the wintertime. Like I said before, they go dormant, and so their nutritional needs are less. The best part is, during calving season, I was talking earlier about if we don't overstimulate them with feed in the wintertime, they lose weight during the wintertime. That fetus is very small when it's born, so there's no calving issues to deal with, and we wouldn't be able to help them if we needed to. So we stay out of the way, so we can go fishing while they're having calves, and when during the winter when everybody else is feeding hay and range cubes, we can kind of stay by the fire and read a book. So that's what we call the bison advantage.
Do buffalo need shelter during the winter?
They don't need shelter. This animal evolved here. I've been told, I don't remember what the number was, but the number of hair follicles per square inch is like times 10 maybe of other livestock, of cattle and horses and whatnot. And they don't need, they'll be on the north side of a hill looking into a 40-mile-an-hour breeze when it's 0. The cold doesn't bother them, the heat doesn't bother them. They don't need a shelter, they don't need a barn. They wouldn't probably stay in it if you had one. So they are very much, if you give them space, give them water, and allow the feed situation, not to be overgrazed, and you let all of those things play into it, they will take care of themselves. And it becomes a pretty easy deal. It gets tough sometimes when we insist on doing it our way, and we learn in time, one way or the other, we learn.
Is there an organization someone can get in touch with if they want to know more about the buffalo?
Absolutely. Kansas Buffalo Association is a great organization consisting of producers right here in the state. The National Bison Association is another fantastic organization that does a lot of outreach and does a lot of education. We have 2 conferences a year, one in winter during the stock show in Denver, and then the summer conference will kind of rotate around the states depending on which state or regional wants to host the event. but there's a lot of networking to be done. There's a lot of learning to be done at those conferences, and meeting the people that you meet there is time well spent, and we learn as much from each other as we do from the speakers up front talking.
How did you get started raising elk?
In 1988, I decided to start farming, and I looked into alternative farming methods, and one of them that appealed to me was raising deer and elk. It was in its infancy at that time. Nobody was really raising them for meat, and the U.S. was importing like 2 million pounds at that time from New Zealand. And so I had an option of buying some animals from upstate New York, 100 head of fallow deer, and I also bought 4 head of elk from northwest Colorado. And so that was my start of my herds.
Has the elk business grown?
Well, we used to until the government got involved. Yeah, I paid $1,200 a head, I think, when I bought mine. And it got as high as $6,000 a head. In fact, there was a bull that sold for $100,000 10 years after I started.
Are there government regulations with raising elk?
They want everything tested. They want everything tested from neighbor to neighbor. They want to test it for TB and brucellosis. If you go across state lines, there's TB, brucellosis, blue tongue, and antiplas, which cattle don't have to be. Why do elk have to be? And now the state of Kansas required us to get a permit to raise them. Well, and all it is just a moneymaker for them, because they never show their face here anyway. They want us to have an 8-foot high fence to keep our animals in and wild ones out, to keep the disease, if we have any, keep them in our fences and make sure that the wild ones don't get the disease. But we're more worried about the wild deer giving our tame ones the disease.
Are there different breeds of elk?
There's 4 different kinds. I can't think of the 4th one. There's the Rocky Mountain elk, which I have, which come from the Rocky Mountains. There's the Manitoba elk, which are a little bit bigger. They come from the Canadian, north of the border. And then there's a Thule elk, which is more in the southwest United States.
What are elk mainly raised for?
Well, right now it's meat production. When we started, it was velvet production. Velvet is where we cut the racks off at a certain stage. When they reach their 4th point, cut the velvet off and turn it over, and we sell it to the Koreans as an aphrodisiac. And you cut the velvet and still had the live animal, so it's a renewable resource every year. And one time we were getting $100 a pound for it. And a good elk will have 28, 29 pounds on his head every year. But then some American farmers got greedy, I guess you might say, and decided to market their own pills. And the Koreans said, we don't like that. So we're not going to buy your velvet anymore. And so the price went down to $8 a pound. And so it wasn't profitable anymore, so we started with the meat production. And right now it's mainly raised for meat. And for the shooting reserves too, there's a big market in the mountains of Colorado for hunting preserves, paying for a hunt, pay $5,000 to $8,000 for opportunity to go hunt on elk. And
Can you get the same cuts of meat off an elk as you do a cow?
the same thing. You get your basic steaks, roasts. The steaks are, you got your KCs and your ribeyes, you got your fillets, and your roasts, there aren't many roasts in it because there isn't much meat under the shoulder. So when I just label mine elk roast, I don't say what kind because it doesn't pay. And then you have all your ground and your, make sausage out of a lot of stuff and make patties. But what started this meat production in the United States was all the meat that was needed in the United States, and it wasn't available. So we were importing it out of New Zealand. And we were importing up to 6 million pounds at one time. And we were getting the good stuff, the steaks and the roasts over here. And the trim and junk is going to Europe. Europe is importing like 15 million pounds. They like the stews and the soups, and that's where that trim goes into, so it better fit their mode of meat over there. Has less cholesterol than skinless chicken and has half the fat of beef. So it's a very, very healthy meat. And when they hear that, then they say maybe we ought to have a little more, but it's getting expensive because it's in short supply. We can't even get some of it imported from New Zealand anymore because there isn't much left over there. And they have thousands of deer farms, elk farms over there. The problem right now is all the good stuff is going for pet foods. Because a year ago I could get venison trim from a supplier, and said he had 65,000 pounds in his freezer. This year I need some for one of my clients, and he said we're 65,000 behind because everything's going to the pet food market. So I had to wait in line, so it took me four months to get my supply in because I only was allotted so much per month.
How long do elk live?
Oh, one guy said he had a cow that had a calf for 22 years. I don't know if that's correct or not, but after the 6th or 7th year, the male elk, the racks start to go down, deteriorate. So, well, they'll go a long time, but the meat is tender till about their 8th or 9th year. After that, the meat starts to get tough. Then it should all go into ground or stew meat.
Do elk have natural predators?
In the wild, they have the wolves and the bears. Here, the coyotes try, but they aren't big enough to take an elk down, unless it's a calf. Cows will protect their calves. I know an elk farmer that had a dog that crawled into the pen, and the elk kind of ignored it until the dog got to the center of the pen. Then the elk surrounded it and killed the dog right there. Because they don't like anybody in their pen. Because my first the first elk I had were that way. They wouldn't let my dog in the pen. First time my dog got in the pen, they were after him, but I had a forklift and he could crawl underneath my forklift and protect him. But these head I have now, they aren't as mean as the rest of them. But yeah, the cows will protect their calves. Their hoofs are like sharp razor blades. When the elk in the rut, I don't want to get between him and his horns. He gets pretty mean. But after the rut, I've had him eat apples out of my hand. They're real gentle. And the cows are real gentle too, unless you get between a cow and her calf. Then you have trouble. Then they want to protect their calf. And I had once where cow was clear down in the pen, and I crawled over the fence and tagged the calf, and I looked up, and the cow was right there. So I backed real slow to the fence, and let the calf get between me and the cow, and I climb up over the fence.
Are there fencing issues for elk?
Well, the state of Kansas wants us to have an 8-foot high fence. And like I said earlier, to keep ours in and the wild ones out. But we've had wild ones jump over the 8-foot high fence. Other than that, there is no other requirement.
Have you had any elk escape? If so, how far did they travel?
They did. Somebody decided to go over the fence. I got a knock on the door at 3 o'clock in the morning by the sheriff. They said there's some elk on the road. And they just went right north of my house and stayed there. And after an hour with a four-wheeler, I got them in. Didn't have any trouble. But there was a guy around Hutch that had some that got out, and they traveled for many miles, and we never did get them all in. So it just depends on the elk, I guess. But I've had deer get out, and deer are not a herding animal. Are a herding animal. They don't want to be by themselves. So I had one of them get out, and it broke its neck trying to get back into the pen because it didn't want to be by itself.
Do all elk have antlers?
Just the males have a rack. I lose them every year. Depending on the age of the elk, I lose them from March 15th all the way to April 15th. And then within a week, they start to grow back. And then they grow back. Sometimes they grow, you can see them grow 2-3 inches a day. Till June is when they reach that, when we start cutting them for velvet. And then they start slowing down. And velvet is just a a term for the stage that the rack's in. It feels like velvet, and it's all nothing but blood. When we cut it, we got to tip it over. Otherwise the blood will run out of it. And then we freeze it, put plastic over the top, and then ship it out to the Koreans.
What's the process for collecting velvet?
We tranquilize them, and we have to. Some people have chutes where they can do it in the chute system. I use a tranquilizer, tranquilize them, and then we give them a sedative around the horn, and then we use a tourniquet around that, and then cut that rack off, and then give them an antidote for the sedative, and then pull the tourniquet off, and then they bleed a little bit, but as soon as they get their head above their heart, the bleeding quits.
What would you tell people who want to go into the elk business?
Well, there's also going to be a market for elk, and it's going to be a good time now because the market for elk meat is very strong right now. In fact, you can't find certain cuts in the United States anymore. It'll be continued just like cattle market because everybody's going to want that lean type meat. And I think it'd be, I started in '88, and the market has its ups and downs just like any other industry. And right now it's pretty steady. You probably have a hard time finding breeding stock right now because the meat market's so strong.
From elk to buffalo, people who have the means and the money have demanded these flavorful, lean, high-protein meats and materials from these animals. The resourceful rancher who has the land and know-how can capitalize on this opportunity to raise, sell, and even slaughter these animals for all their different uses. Remember, if you want to check out this and more episodes of Real Ag, go to SmokyHillsTV.org. For the Real Ag crew, I'm Kyle Bauer, and this has been Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.